Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. Today we're going to be looking at a deck that I got requested a few times in comments. We're going to be looking at the BP03 Fable Sword. So first off, what is Fable? Fable is a sort of overarching trait in BP03 Flame of Lævateinn that covers all 6 classes. It's based around fairy tales, sort of stories like the storybook stuff, Beauty and the Beast, Princess Snow White, Wizards of Oz. It's present in all 6 classes, but more heavily focused on in Forest, Haven, and Sword. We've already looked at decks for both Forest and Haven, so now we'll be looking at Sword, sort of the final class that focuses on this archetype. All 6 classes have access to the neutral Fable cards that sort of act as a glue to tie the trait together. More of the generic good strong effects that you're going to want for the decks are found there, and you'll see them in all the Fable lists for any class, headed up by Alice, Wonderland Explorer. So before we jump into the actual deck list, a reminder as always, this is meant to be more of a starting point for the deck. It has not been optimized for any specific meta, so please definitely give it a try yourself. Make any changes that you find necessary to fit your playstyle or your local meta. Looking at our main 40 here, you'll see a lot of sort of staple Swordcraft cards that you'd find in any deck, but also a pretty wide smattering of the Fable cards that are definitely not going to be in most of the lists and are sort of unique to this list. Sword has kind of a little bit of a unique advantage in the Fable archetype that nothing else does, in that Gunnermaid Saria being able to search princesses actually hits a few of our Fable cards that the other classes don't get to search specifically, so we can see those here. And then our Evolve deck, featuring multiple copies of sort of the Evolves that we want to see throughout the game, 1 copy each of more of our top-end cards. You can also check out the deck log page for this deck at the code in the bottom right corner. That's going to be QKV3. Breakdown here of our deck. You can see we got 37 followers, 3 spells, very follower heavy. We're just trying to keep bodies on the board, keep attacking our opponent. Our cost curve is generally pretty low. We do have, that is 27 cards at 3 or lower, with 5 more at 4, and very light on the top end. Part of that is that Cinderella, our 7-drop, does only hit cost 5 and lowers off of her effect, so we definitely want to keep as much as possible down there. Only having Leonidas and Cinderella herself above that point. We do also have a little higher count of neutral followers, 9 than you might see in a normal Swordcraft deck, just because of Leonidas's amulet not hitting neutral followers, but they are all pretty important to the deck's functioning, so we just kind of have to deal with that and take it as it comes. Looking at our cards in specific, starting off, we've got 3 copies of Actress Faria. So this is a neutral 1-drop 2/2. Activated ability, engage, select another Fable follower on your field and put a Fable counter on it. So we played this in both of the other Fable lists as well. In this deck, we have 3 cards that want Fable counters. We have Maisie, Red Riding Hood, who can spend Fable counters for a destroy effect. We have Rapunzel, who's very overstat, just sort of beat stick with ward, but it can't attack unless it has Fable counters. And Cinderella, our main boss card, that's going to spend Fable counters to check the top 4 cards of our deck and put a cost 5 or lower straight into play. So we can use Faria to just sort of power up any of these as we go, but seeing as this is a sword deck, we are a little sort of aggressive leaning. We can also just use Faria as a 1-cost 2/2 in place of, say, Iron Rock Defender or, what is it, the Ninja Trainee? Just any of the other 1-cost 2/2 sort of goblin stat line to punch our opponent some. And she will definitely be punching our opponent. She is also a princess follower for the effects where that's relevant. Next, we have a Maid Leader. This card is not as common in the heroic decks, but we do play it here just because we have some important followers that evolve, and we would like to find them as quick as possible. Alice in particular. So Maid Leader is a 1-cost 1/1. It evolves for 2, which is sort of the normal stat line and cost for like the tutors, the good early game evolves. It's going to evolve into a 2/2. On evolve, search your deck for a follower with an evolve ability, reveal it, and add it to your hand. We have 6 different followers in our deck with evolve abilities, one of which being Maid Leader herself. Sometimes you'll Maid Leader for Maid Leader, usually not. Alice, Wonderland Explorer, is kind of the main thing that we'll want to be searching here, since it does set up most of the rest of our game. But you can also search for Floral Fencer or Leonidas, which are 2 other sort of more generic staple sword cards that are still important for us here. Albert and Tokaiteo are also both followers that can evolve and both threaten storm damage, so maybe late game if you draw a Maid Leader, you can use it to search just sort of a finisher to close out the game. Our last 1-drop follower is Old Man and Old Woman. This is the 1-drop 1/2 from set 3. It has Bane. This is a Fable trait follower, so this will be relevant for quite a number of our effects. And otherwise, having Bane is just good for removal. If we play this early, it basically forces our opponent to use effect removal on it instead of attacking it, since anything they try to trade into it will die as a result. This can also be really good late in the game. If you get the Leonidas' Resolve Amulet out, which gives your followers +3/+3 and Rush. Rush plus Bane, really solid combination that can help us take out any wards for our other followers to get through. The cost of only 1 play point. Lastly, at 1 cost, we have a spell, Kiss of the Princess. This is the only spell we play. If there's a princess follower on your field, this card costs 1 less to play. We have 4 different princesses in the deck, at a total of, I think, 10 copies. So, quarter of our deck is princesses at 1 cost, 3 cost, 5 cost, and 7 cost, funnily enough. Those can reduce the cost of this to play. 2 of them it's going to be relevant with, Rapunzel and Cinderella, since you'll actually be wanting to play Kiss the Princess while they're around. The effect is to choose one of the following. You can select a follower on your field and give it +1 attack. You may put a Fable counter on it. Obviously, the +1 attack is going to be good with anything that's going toward our opponent's face or needs to hit specific thresholds to clear followers. But the Fable counter can also be relevant for Maisie, Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, or Cinderella, who all have ways to utilize the Fable counters. Rapunzel, especially being a princess and needing a Fable counter to attack, this can be a pretty good card to play alongside her to enable her attacking period. And it makes her a 5/5, so good stat line. When you're looking at cards like Maisie, Red Riding Hood, who has to engage to use the effect that costs counters, ideally in those scenarios, you're actually putting the counter on Alice instead, and then using Alice's ability to move it to Maisie. But if you don't have the Alice, you can just play it straight on Maisie. The downside is that you're putting +1 attack on something that's engaging instead of attacking. The second option you have here is to select up to 3 Swordcraft followers in your cemetery, return them to your deck, shuffle it, and draw a card. You can select 0 for this if you just want to pay 1 to draw a card, make this kind of a slightly worse insight. But the shuffle effect is mainly there for Cinderella, since Cinderella's effect is look at top 4 to put a cost 5 or lower into play. If there are specific cards you've already seen and played through that you want your Cinderella to be hitting, typically this is going to be like followers with Storm. You can use Kiss of the Princess to shuffle them back into your deck, increase your odds of Cinderella finding them. In this deck, that's not going to be super critical since we're mainly using Cinderella as just getting any kind of body. We're not really trying to use her to kind of like combo kill our opponent. We just want value off of her as she attacks our opponent. So this is probably typically going to be using the +1 attack and Fable counter mode. Moving into 2 costs, we have 2 copies of Gunner Maid Saria. This is a 1/3. Fanfare, search your deck for a princess follower, reveal it, and add it to your hand. As I said, we have 4 different princesses. This can search any of them. Usually you're not going to care to search Faria, though it can come up occasionally. Say you already have Saria and Rapunzel. Maybe you search Faria to be able to get a counter on Rapunzel. Usually you're probably going to search either Rapunzel itself to have a 2-drop into 3-drop curve, search Aurelia to answer a big board, or just search Cinderella to have a finisher available. We only play 2 copies of this because it's usually not getting us like super important curve pieces outside of Rapunzel. And we don't really have reason to search like multiple Cinderellas early. They'd just be clogging our hand at that point. Our other 2-drop is Lævateinn, Vanguard Captain. This card is probably the least important like specific card in the deck. It just has the best stat line of any 2-drop. You could very easily swap this out for any other 2-drop you want. If you really wanted, you could go to a 3rd Saria and a 3rd Maisie, or just keep the 2 Lævateinn, switch them to Veteran Lancers, anything like that at 2-drop. We just want more bodies at 2 since we only have 6 currently. Sometimes you'll be evolving your maid leader on 2, but having those bodies is very important. We don't really want to be wasting play points on turn 2 if possible. And 2 copies of Maisie Red Riding Hood. This is a 2-cost 1/1 fanfare. If there's another Fable follower on your field, put a Fable counter on this card. We do have 7 total different Fable followers in the deck, 2 of which are 1-drops that would come out before Maisie. So decent chance you can hit one of those. If not, you can just play Maisie, not get a counter, maybe use Alice on the next turn to move a counter onto her. Since her effect does cost 1 anyway, you're likely not going to be running this out with the intention of needing the Fable counter on turn 2. So that's usually fine if you have to play this on turn 2. Unfortunately, it is just a 1/1. But this card can be really good as something to find off of Alice and sort of sit in your EX area until later in the game. Or you can bring it out and start very cheaply destroying some of your opponent's bigger followers. Since the second effect, it's pay 1, engage, remove a Fable counter to destroy an enemy follower on the field. It's just a really solid removal, really cheap overall. And it is repeatable. It does force our opponent to find a way to remove Maisie, which isn't hard given her stat line, but it redirects removal away from some of our more threatening cards otherwise. 3 copies of Alice Wonderland Explorer. As usual, this is sort of the linchpin consistency card for the deck. It's a 3-cost 3/3 fanfare. Put a Fable counter on this card. Activate ability, remove a Fable counter from this card to select a Fable follower on your field or in your EX area and put a Fable counter on it. So, of course, this can put counters on Maisie for her destroy effect. It can put counters on Rapunzel so that she can attack. Or it can put counters on Cinderella to spin the wheel. The nice thing is that Alice's evolved form lets us put Fable cards into our EX area and save them for later. We can use this effect to put the counter on something in EX area. So we can just sort of store up Maisie's for when they are useful and just keep counters on them in the back, or store up a Rapunzel or Cinderella that are just ready to fire off as soon as we play them, even if we don't have other ways to get counters on them. Of course, we can pay 1 to evolve into a 4/4. On evolve, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may put up to 2 Fable cards from among them into your EX area. Put the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. Again, 7 different Fable cards. Most of them are pretty nice to hit off of this. This is kind of one of the advantages of playing the Fable Sword package over the normal Sword decks, is that Alice is giving you a lot more card advantage and a lot more bodies than the normal Sword decks get access to. The downside is that they are probably a little worse on average than what your other Sword packages would be getting you. So we're choosing quantity over quality here. The quality is good enough to get us there. We're not going to be just like heroic entrying into Machanites on turn 3 and making our opponent hate their life. We're doing a little more fair stuff over here, unfortunately. Our next 3-drop is the ever-present Floral Fencer. 3-cost 3/3, evolves for 1. Evolves into a 4/4 that summons a 1/1 and a 2/2, a knight and a steel-clad knight. This is just board presence. It's too good not to play. It just gets you cards. It's hard for your opponent to deal with all 3 of these at once, especially on curve. So that means you're usually getting at least 3, if not 4 damage through the turn after you play this. So just really good to have around. Next, we have Rapunzel. This is another neutral card. It's a 3-cost 4/5, which is an absolutely massive stat line. It has Ward, and if it has no Fable counters, it can't attack enemies. So that is followers or leader. We only have 2 cards that can put Fable counters on this, unfortunately. It's either Kiss of the Princess or Alice Wonderland Explorer, moving a counter to it. If we don't draw either of those, Rapunzel is unfortunately just sitting unable to attack. But that's generally still fine. 3-cost 4/5 is a massive stat line, and since it has Ward, it's still a good anti-aggression tool to just sit on the board while we sort of stall out until our 5-drop, 6-drop slots that are going to be impacting the board more and helping us win the game. Looking at our 4-drops, we have Albert Liebensaber. This is a 4-cost 3/5 with Storm, so good butt, 3 damage. Storm still pretty decent. This is low enough cost that we can still get it off of Cinderella. And if we evolve it for 3, stays the same stat line, but On evolve, does not take combat damage for the turn, and gains the ability Strike, refresh this follower once per turn. It's going to let us attack twice and get 6 damage into our opponent's face. This card's really good with Leonidas' Resolve, since it's going to make him a 6/8 that can attack twice, which is 12 damage straight off of Albert. Really good at closing games out. One of the better cards that we could find off of Cinderella, or just have lined up as a finisher. Young Ogre Hunter Momo is our Fable 4-drop. This is a 4-cost 5/5, which is a really good stat line, actually. And it has some pretty good text on it as well. It actually surprises me that this card's a silver with just the massive amount of text on it. It has a sail, which is a pretty uncommon keyword. Lets us attack refreshed followers on our opponent's board, which can be something that Sword has issues dealing with, since a lot of Sword's removal is going to be kind of combat-based. Removing refreshed followers can be tough sometimes. So we get a sail. Fanfare if we have another Fable follower on the field. So as always, any of our 7. This gains Rush. So we can just play this out as a 4-drop that can attack straight into something refreshed if we have another Fable follower, which is really powerful. And Follower Strike, if the enemy follower that we're attacking has 5 defense or less, draw a card, then discard a card. It's not card advantage, but it can help get us into just, better cards than what we have in hand. Late game, if we're sitting on like an extra maid leader that we just don't have use for, or if we have an extra old man and old woman and we're looking for instead, ways to threaten our opponent with damage, this can just be a good way to draw ditch, find new cards. Especially on the turn you play Momo if you're swinging her to remove a follower. And a lot of times at 5 defense, even if you are playing her to remove a follower, she's probably going to live. Which means your opponent still has to find a way to answer her, or that's going to be 5 going into the face next turn. Aurelia Regal Saber is a 5-cost 4/6, serves similar purpose to Momo. It has Rush and a Sail, similar to Momo. We're paying 1 extra stat, or 1 extra cost for it to -1 attack, +1 defense, so a little bigger butt, less threatening on offense. However, this does also have Ward, which is super good keyword. And Fanfare, select an enemy leader. If there are at least 3 cards on their field, this gets +2/+2 and Aura. So it's going to make this a 6/8 that can't be chosen by effects, which obviously is significantly stronger than Momo, with the caveat of, someone having enough board for it to trigger. We only play 1 of this. This could be a 2 of if you want to cut somewhere else. It is searchable off of Saria, so that helps. But we don't really play any other ways to search it. The only other way you're finding it is off of Cinderella's effect. I don't think this card is incredibly necessary given everything else we have removal-wise. But if you want that extra ward body that can be really big and hard to remove, then you could go up to 2 on this and it would be fine. We also have 2 copies of Tokai Teo at 5 cost. This is a 5-cost 4/4. Fanfare, select an enemy follower on the field, deal it X damage. X equals 2 times the number of followers on your field, including this one. So it's going to be at least Fanfare deal 2. It could be up to Fanfare deal 10 if you have a full board. Tokai Teo is really good at just coming down and removing single threats immediately, especially if anything lives on your board. It's going to be able to deal 4 or 6 damage pretty easily. It doesn't have to be Swordcraft followers on your fields. This is still fine with things like Rapunzel, Faria, etc. So overall, really nice card. It can also evolve for 2 into a 5/5 with Storm. So this is, again, another card that we could hit off of Cinderella if we have some extra play points to evolve with. And that gets us some more instant Storm damage. Which means, Cinderella into this. If you have Leonidas' Resolve and, 1 extra play point and an Evo point, you could just jam Cinderella, flip this off the top, and 16 your opponent, which is kind of cool. Otherwise, as with the rest of these higher costed cards, it's a finisher. It's here for its removal. It's a finisher. Good, just sort of mid-rangey top end card. At 6-drop, all we have is 2 copies of Leonidas. We can search this off of Maid Leader, and I do think this card, despite only playing 2 copies and 1 evolve, I do think this card is pretty important to this deck's strategy. Since Cinderella is flipping cards off the top, and we are kind of going for quantity over quality. I think having the card that works best with quantity is pretty important to our deck. So one of your made leaders is probably going toward Alice, and the other one is probably going toward Leonidas here, if you don't just hard draw him. So he's a 6-drop, 5/6. It's okay enough stats on its own, not fantastic, but he evolves for 1 into a 6/7. On evolve, deal 5 to an enemy follower, deal 5 to itself, so that makes him a 6/2, but does pretty much instantly remove something, and since he's evolved, he can also attack to remove something else. When he does and inevitably crashes in, you get the last words effect to summon a Leonidas' Resolve token. Leonidas' Resolve being an 8-cost amulet with whenever a Swordcraft follower is put onto your field, give it +3/+3 and rush. So this is the way that we're just making a big board. Inevitability through resolving a Leonidas' Resolve, and then I always hate saying it that way, like resolving Resolve, and then getting like a Floral Fencer to make just a massive amount of stats. That's what 4, 2, and 1 is 7 + 9. You get 16 of stats off of evolving a Floral Fencer, or just anything like that. Your board starts to get unanswerable very quickly, especially when you consider the big decks that have board-wide removal right now being like Humpty Dumpty in Fable Haven. Only deals 5 damage. That's going to be hard-pressed to remove anything that's getting +3/+3. And our last follower, our legendary, our main iconic boss monster here at 7-drop is Cinderella, the 5/5 Princess Fable. Has Storm, so Cinderella is going to be swinging in the moment she hits the board. Fanfare, if there's another Fable follower on your field, put a Fable counter on this card. So as always, our Hull Smattering. And Strike, remove a Fable counter from this card. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may put a follower that costs 5 play points or less from among them onto the field. Put the remaining cards into your cemetery, notably. That is a cemetery instead of bottom of deck, which is interesting. I don't know that there's really anything in this deck in particular that interacts with that. Obviously, Kiss of the Princess, if you mill cards that you want your deck Cinderella to hit, you can shuffle them back in. It thins your deck rather quickly. But I don't know that there's anything we're really benefiting from from putting them into our cemetery with this card. Maybe later there'll be an interesting way to sort of utilize that with some of the deck out sword stuff, but that's for a whole nother topic. Generally here we're just trying to hit either like an Albert or Tokai Teo that we can just get some storm damage in, or just something that can stick to the board and be like a decent body. Hitting Aurelia is pretty cool. Hitting Momo is fine. That's still a 5/5. Hitting Rapunzel is fine. Any of these things that can sort of stick on board, especially after Leonidas' Resolve is down. Cinderella comes in as an 8/8 and is chunking for 8. If you hit, say, a Floral Fence or really any of those things, it's just fantastic at that point. I suppose worst case scenario, if you flip a Gunner-made Saria off of this, you just go grab another Cinderella for next turn, which is pretty sweet. So there's some cool stuff Cinderella can do as sort of a top end to close out your games. Unfortunately, 7 it's high, and you are going to have to work to get here and still have time to do that stuff consistently. So here's the deck as a whole one more time. Some of the pros of this deck, reasons I think it is, worth trying this out. You do have more card advantage through Alice than a normal Swordcraft deck is going to have. Normally they're playing Gym Staff Commander and maybe Avant Blader, though less so Avant Blader nowadays, which are searching cards for sure. But Alice is just spinning the wheel constantly and getting you like 2 cards at a time, hopefully. So lots of bodies to keep throwing at the opponent. Most of our cards do have strong stat lines. At worst, we're playing 3/3s that evolve into 4/4s. But like Rapunzel is fat, Momo pretty fat, like Aurelia, Leonidas. Like these cards all have really good stat lines that are pretty hard for our opponent to remove. And I suppose that's another reason you could consider extra Aurelias. Aurelia does have 6 defense base, which means she survives a Humpty Dumpty as well. And that deck does actually tend to sit a bunch of amulets on board. So Aurelia gaining Aura could mean, 10 soldiers can't shoot her to finish her off, which maybe that's a reason if you're playing against a lot of Fable Haven to consider like the second, maybe even third copies of Aurelia. That's definitely something to test around with. And lastly, decent removal effects mixed with our aggression. We have Maisie, which is just kind of unconditional destroy. We have Momo being able to attack with Assail. Aurelia has Assail. Tokai Teo can shoot stuff. Leonidas is usually trading into 2 bodies. There are some other options you could play for even more removal if you'd like that. We'll look at those in a second. But, you know, just good cards all around. Though it does have to sort of stay follower focused just for Cinderella's sake and the sake of all the Fable cards that we need. Some of the cons of the deck are that many of our cards kind of lose all of their effects when we don't have Fable counters. Rapunzel, while, as I said, she does have a really good stat line, it is hard to kill your opponent if you can't attack them. Maisie, without Fable counters, is actually just a 2-cost 1/1, which is kind of the worst thing you can be playing. That's why we only run 2. And Cinderella, 7-drop 5/5 with Storm is just not great if we can't get Fable counters onto her. We'd rather, at that point, you know, if you're a 5/5 with Storm for 7, you'd rather just play Tokai Teo because you get removal with it as well. Or another copy of Albert to evolve and get 6 damage for your 7 at least. So you do have to take that into consideration. Sometimes the order you draw these cards in is just not quite going to line up in a way that leaves you with enough Fable counters for everything. And that is hopefully something that we'll see fixed in the future. I know in BP09, which is Dawnbreak Night Edge that just released in Japanese, there is a little bit of Fable sword support. I haven't read it, so I don't know exactly if it fixes these problems, but maybe it does, and maybe we'll revisit this deck when we get there. Some of the other cards I consider, kind of the main thing I would look at, other than what I mentioned with sort of swapping out Lævateinn, is if you really wanted to go all in on Cinderella with this deck and try to just hit absolute gas every time you spin the Cinderella wheel, you could look at playing more cards with Storm, like Novice Trooper. Maybe Mock Knight if you want to get really crazy and try to fit Cinderella and enough Fable cards into a heroic package that you could hit Mock Knights off of Cinderella and have them still be good. That could be cool. Cards like Amelia. Amelia is a potential removal. If you flip Amelia off of a Cinderella spin, then you get to deal 4 damage to something, or you just get to put another follower from your hand into play, which means the 7 play point investment for Cinderella effectively got you 14 play points of body, which is really cool. It's really funny if you go second, right, and you're like, ah, yes, turn 7, Cinderella, swing, hit Amelia, summon Floral Fencer from hand, Evo point, make a 2/2 and a 1/1. You're like, that's, what is that? That's like 1/2. It's a 1/1 2/2 3/3 4/4 5/5. So whatever that adds up to, that's 9 plus 6. That's 15. You have 15 of stats for your 7 play point investment, that's cool. Amelia could let you get some like really strong power plays off of your Cinderellas. Or, you know, you could just play generically good cards like Dark Angel Olivia that have fanfare effects and try to spin into those, because Cinderella doesn't actually care if you're playing Swordcraft followers. So yeah, that's nice. I know people have messed around with Dark Angel Olivia in some of the slower sword decks already, just as a way to sort of stall out the game a little longer to get to their Leonidas. Obviously, she doesn't benefit from Leonidas, but it does help the deck get there. So these are all options. Mess around with them. Let me know how you find the best ways to set up Cinderella are. Personally, I think I'm going to end up looking at Cinderella mostly in the context of maybe Glory Finder once we get that stuff released, but we'll see. Maybe I'll do some Glory Finder videos once that comes out. Until then, you know, here's our deck list once again. We are playing basically all the Fable sword cards. The only 2 we're not are the Hedgehog, the Bladed Hedgehog. It's a 2-drop. That is another card you could consider in the Lævateinn slot. The problem with it, and why I ended up cutting it from the list, is it does need to evolve. Originally, I didn't have Tokai Teo in here, and I was -1 Alice, -1 Tokai Teo for 2 Hedgehog evolves, which is potentially worth considering, but I think Tokai Teo is a really strong card. I don't know that I would really want to cut her from the list. So we're not playing that, and we're not playing the... Oh, shoot, I forget the name of it. It's a 3-drop 3/4 with bunny ears that is fanfare if you have another Fable follower draw a card. I think that card's just too slow for this. If you really want all Swordcraft followers and maybe a little less reliance on Fable counters, you could cut Rapunzel for that. I think it's like Rabbit Ear Attendant or something maybe. You can play that as a 3-drop instead of Rapunzel. That way you're not getting stuck with something that can't attack. 3-drop 3/4 is still a reasonable stat line. And it can also follow up any of the other Fable cards to just sort of get you an extra draw. It's a little more card advantage. So also something to consider there. Probably should have put that on my other cards slide as well. But I do believe we're playing every other Fable Swordcraft follower, at least. And here's our Evolve deck. So again, like I said, we were considering being only on 2 Alice and 0 Teo, but I think this is probably how I would want the Evolve deck to look. The 3rd Alice is probably the biggest flex slot. If you wanted to cut that for like a 2nd Albert, 2nd Tokai, or 2nd Leonidas, those are all potential options there. As usual, thank you for watching. This was one that I was pretty interested in when people mentioned, you know, I posted the Heroic Sword video and people were like, "Ooh, can you do Fable Sword? Like, Cinderella is cool. That's the other legendary in the set." And I was like, yeah, that... I kind of looked at the stuff and I was like, that's definitely intriguing. So it's been fun looking at all those cards, kind of thinking about how that deck could look. Looking at these kind of decks that are probably really good even just to take to like a championship showdown or your local tournaments. Or Springfest even. Springfest is a great place for just not tier 1 decks. Since, you know, you don't have to win every game if you have a team. As long as 2 people on the team can win every round, you're fine. It's a cool place to show off some of those really fun decks. So hopefully we'll see a lot of those at Springfest. Just cool things that people have come up with. Just wild inventions, right? But again, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what more decks you'd like to see. I'd love to take a look at some more strategies here. And until then, you should have some videos on the screen that you can watch. And I'll see you next time.